Friends of the planet, welcome. We're so excited to have with us today Elizabeth Mrema, who is the Executive Secretary of the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity. And we've had her here before, but we really wanted to talk with her today as an extension of Women's History Month to talk about the role of women in conservation around the world in particular. So welcome, Secretary Mrema.
Thank you.
And tell us where you're coming to us from today.
Today I'm in Nairobi, the capital city of the United Nations Environment Program, as well as the capital city for UN Habitat, both of which very important for women to play their role.
We wanted to talk to you just for a minute first about this big year for the Convention on Biological Diversity, and how has the work carried on remotely, and how is the preparation for the meeting going? I think there are now official dates, specifically how's 30 by 30, the big initiative of the meeting, coming along?
Certainly the world has been filled with all uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. But for us in the biodiversity community, despite the ongoing pandemic, our preparations and negotiations of our processes have continued, primary of which is the preparations for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which has advanced nicely. And we think we are still on track to really get the robust, ambitious post-2020 biodiversity framework being developed and hopefully adopted at the next conference of the parties, which now our hosts have announced the dates to be 11th to 24th October of this year. Of course, fingers crossed that the situation improves even better than where we are today, and not just improves, that the situation is equally robust to allow delegates to be able to travel to Kunming in China. We have had successes in holding a variety of meetings virtually over the past several months. Actually, all our smaller meetings, working group, technical expert working group continued as had been planned, and in that process enabled us to really gain experience in the organizations of virtual meetings. And all these meetings have enabled us to maintain and keep momentum and underlining the importance of biodiversity issues. And recall last year, we had the UN Summit on Biodiversity. We had the Leaders Pledge. Earlier this year, we had One Planet Summit. All these demonstrated that biodiversity has really become a global issue of great concern. Specifically, 30 by 30, proposed by a number of countries. I think it is important to bear in mind and to note the Convention on Biological Diversity parties are yet to agree whether to go by the 30% target as proposed or not, particularly for protected areas by 2030. And we'll have to see whether the parties will agree. However, there is some evidence suggesting that goal, if adopted, will actually be consistent with the pathways towards 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, provided, that's the main caveat, that it could be reached in a way which does not undermine societal objectives. And these are particularly food security, particularly also engaging and involving indigenous peoples and local communities and respecting their rights, their land rights. So if these safeguards will be put in place and hopefully agreed by the parties, one can say the proposal might be adopted. For now, we wait and see.
To pick up on something you said about inclusivity in these negotiations, we know that on many levels, when women are included as decision makers, conservation, climate initiatives, they have better outcomes. And so your leadership at CBD has meant so much for so many women. And I wanted to ask, how are you ensuring that women have a seat at the table in these year's negotiations?
Having women at the seat at the table is key and paramount. But I want us to look at the position of a woman in society in two levels. Not all women can sit at the table, and those who sit at the negotiation tables are the elite, quote and unquote, women. But you have the 80% of the women who are farmers, the local communities in the villages. Those are not sitting at the negotiation table. And these 80% are the key women who are important when it comes to biodiversity conservation. They are the fishermen, they are the agriculturists, they are the ones who need to speak up and be heard. They are the ones who need to also participate in the decisions which will affect their life. So there's this group of women which need to be recognized. As far as the Secretariat is concerned, of course, our work on gender equality includes raising awareness and building understanding on the important role women play in biodiversity conservation as well as in sustainable use. And we're really working in shifting this rhetoric from depicting women as only quote and unquote vulnerable group towards recognizing women's role as leaders and agents of change. And this, of course, involves diverse examples, clear messages of better understanding of women's contribution, and particularly leadership role is what will make a difference in achieving biodiversity objectives. And when we talk of bringing women to the negotiation table, we should not only focus to women. We need also to get the men. If they are the majority in the negotiations, we need to get their buy-in. Because if they are the one to give that space, then they need to understand that these barriers to markets, to capital, to training, to technology need also to be benefited by the women, to be able then to play their role. For us at the Secretariat, of course, we work also with partners. We have, for instance, CBD Women Caucus. We have Friends of Gender Equality Group. But as I said, we have UN Women, all heavily involved in our processes, and all, again, with that clear that to bring the role of women and gender equality in the discussions of our biodiversity processes, to raise awareness, to encourage the parties and other stakeholders to bring more women so that then their needs and concerns can be taken in these negotiations. But of course, we still have homework to do.
Yes, we totally understand that without better gender equity, without more women's rights, we won't have that trickle up, that bubble up, that grassroots support for women that is really necessary to make it possible to have the policies we need for them in their communities. It's a really important message that gender equality will help to bring about better biodiversity.
And that equality can only be brought about by empowering them.
By empowering them, exactly, by helping them find their power.
Yes.
And men have to be part of that equation. We can't do it by ourselves.
Yes, we can't do it alone. For many societies like where I come from, if we continue by history, then the men will still be continuing with their role. So we need them on board.
Right.
We respect them and need them to support us.
Well, I think strong women like you are going to make sure that they hear this message. So I wonder how you actually reach the younger generation too. I know for us here in the States and maybe in developing countries, the climate crisis is top of mind for a lot of women, but they may not have really heard about the biodiversity crisis. How are you seeing this come about in young women? Is there a Greta Thunberg for biodiversity out there somewhere that we haven't met yet?
Frankly speaking, I will disagree with that statement. Why am I saying I will disagree? We see young women, we see the youth very much well aware of biodiversity crisis and the impacts it poses, but also women in the villages and communities who unfortunately lack viable alternatives, being open to different ways of life. This continued cycle of poverty and subsistence lifestyles dependent and also decreasing the natural resources availability, that awareness is there. Clearly now there's a clear understanding that climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, healthy crisis, land degradation are one and the same. We cannot deal with one in isolation to the other. Where I will agree, in the past years, it seemed attention even of the youth, the Greta, was more on climate action, but now more and more that connection being made, biodiversity, land degradation, healthy systems have become also part of the equation. And we see the young people being very visible, vocal in debates, not just in climate change, even in our biodiversity. And in our biodiversity particularly, we have a whole global movement of youth in the form of Global Youth Biodiversity Network, with networks in over 76 countries, wow, 76 or 96 countries so far. And they participate and represent all these networks in all processes under the convention. They have organized, because I've participated in quite a number of their own virtual meetings. First, creating awareness of the link between climate in particular and biodiversity, but more so ensuring that the youth play their role in the negotiations for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Because remember, when it is adopted, when it is time for implementation, and we are looking at a framework in the medium term to 2030 and beyond to 2050, the leaders of this world will not be me or you. It will be our youth today. And we have made sure they are fully engaged. Even with the IUCN World Conservation Congress, we will have a whole global youth summit, again to look at ways of how the youth can not just discuss the Congress matters, IUCN, which are all nature, but making these different connections.
Absolutely. And Secretary, I wanted to ask, what is your advice for young people who want to work in the field of biodiversity? How can they best break in, and what should they be thinking about?
I will begin with my own family, my children who are teenagers. I keep telling them, anything you do today, they have to tell me what is that they are doing or thinking which does not have an environmental connotation. Whether they are an engineer, whether they are lawyers, whether they are IT, whatever they do, they eat, they play, they see around them. It is nature, it is biodiversity. Everything begins with them where they are. Is it going out and enjoy the nature? Is it the waste management at home? Do we recycle what we use at home and not just trashing? Is it the telephones and the laptops they are using? How are they disposed of? You see, everything they do is environment, is nature. And if that is the case, they don't need to really choose a career and say, I want to do biodiversity conservation. But we want to empower them to understand whatever they do, whatever they think of, anything around them, they will do biodiversity conservation because they will be looking at themselves. So we want to remove the youth from the narrow-minded, that I'm biodiversity conservation and I remain there and forget what waste means, what sustainable consumption production means. You see, we want them to understand themselves, situation around them, and put that into everything they do. So whether they are scientists, economists, bankers, they become really their career path in biodiversity conservation, in sustainable use of the environment around them, because then you bring these issues with you in whatever you do, and you help us to also deliver that message, create that awareness as you implement projects at national level or regional level or international level. In whatever skill building they will be taken, then that will be there.
That's such great advice. I think it's great advice for everyone, but it is especially important for the young people out there to think about this as a way of life, not just something that some people do. Thank you so much, Secretary Mrema, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. We wish you the best of luck with all your work this year. Good luck at the convention. We hope that you are a huge success there, and we'll be watching, and we'll try to catch up with you right after that.
Thank you very much. But your work helps us a million, because these messages, when they go out there, we know they are not just being listened, but they are taken into practical actions to make a difference. So again, all of us have a role to play. Just as I said, you are a journalist, you are an environmentalist. You don't need to go to school to again do a specialize in environment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.